and suffering Israel has caused here will be visible on the faces of those who were spared. Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera, at the Shifa Hospital in Gaza City.
In the war zone, the Israelis continue their full-scale military assault on the ground and from the air.
Israel has been in a process of ethnically cleansing the Palestinians since before the State of Israel began.
The tripartite structure of oppression. One, historical colonialism stemming from Nakba, the catastrophe in 1948 when Palestinians were driven out of their land. Two, it is occupation, the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Three is the apartheid-like treatment of Palestinian citizens in the national territory of Israel, as well as Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza.
You've got second-class citizens. That is not democracy.
Massive ethnic cleansing and atrocities had been committed.
The administration has a policy of keeping the Palestinian population under their thumbs, and by very definition, it's an apartheid state.
What I am against are Israeli policies. Palestinians don't have the right to return for it. Palestinians are restricted to mobility.
In a system which separates a people, it's just not right.
A lot of Americans are unaware because of the false information that we receive from the corporate media.
The more I investigate, the more I realize how much there is unequal treatment.
This occupation is bad for the Palestinians. Obviously, it's bad for Israel, and it's bad for the United States. And so we have to start somewhere to pull back on our support of this illegal occupation, and so I'm supporting the divestment.
To pressure the State of Israel to make change in their policies.
I support boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS, because there was a call from Palestinian civil society.
Palestinian civil society, which in this case meant about 170 grassroots organizations in Palestine and the Palestinian diaspora.
To basically advocate solidarity with the Palestinians.
We need to break the sort of one-track mind of the government and encourage them to think radically differently by refusing to finance the direction they're going.
It's also one of the most effective nonviolent tactics.
Boycott, divestment, sanctions is one of the most politically astute, strategic, morally upholdable ways of nonviolently resisting.
It's a way of continuing a struggle that began in the 60s against segregation, the struggle for equality for blacks, and it's the same kind of thing today. It's a struggle for justice for Palestinians.
When Nelson Mandela became the first black president through the first democratic elections, that was all part and process of a much wider struggle, of which divestment was a really important part. South Africans have been very much part of the conversations around divestment in Israel.
I'm encouraged by the fact that many Jewish people whom I know feel that we need to do something to prevent the State of Israel from running the nation into a dead end.
As a Jew raised in the United States, I feel like it is my responsibility to be vocal on the issue of Israel's occupation of Palestine, and more so than just being vocal is to take action.
Most Americans and most Jews feel strongly about human rights.
And people in Minnesota can understand their complicity in the ongoing occupation of Israel and the apartheid that's going on against the Palestinian people.
To get Minnesota to divest from the 2 Israel bonds that it holds.
The state of Minnesota holds bonds, so it's directly investing in the state of Israel.
Minnesota should divest from Israel until Israel changes its policies.
The money from the sales of Israel bonds goes directly into the general fund, the general treasury in Israel, and is used to support infrastructure projects such as bypass roads, the separation wall, and settlements. All of these projects support the apartheid system in Israel.
And I also see it as a way that Minnesota taxpayers and pensioners, retirement funds, will no longer aid and abet in the oppression, the colonization of Palestinians.
Minnesota should divest from Israel bonds because the money from Israel bonds is encouraging the State of Israel to move in a direction that I think will be disastrous.
This is our chance to say that we are aware of this problem and we are doing something to end this.
Minnesota has divested from Sudan and Iran, and South Africa. We hope that the state of Minnesota will end its economic ties with Israel until Israel complies with international law.
Being a Palestinian,
As a young person from Southern Africa,
As a Jew,
as an Indian,
As a Muslim law student,
As a Catholic,
I want Minnesota to divest from Israel.
There's no more powerful message that we can give to Arab people, to Middle Eastern people, to people all around the world, that we stand with them and we stand with right and we stand with justice, and we're willing to challenge those powerful people. If we can do that, it's the best thing we can do for peace in Minnesota and in the world.
it's about time that Minnesota stood on the right side of history.